side of the page. Okay. The Gemara asked the question, Rav had deduced from the Mishnah that if a person steals something from a woman, and then he gives the object to the woman that he stole from her, he says, Harei Mukadeshes Lik. And she remains silent, she accepts the stolen item. And it was witnessed by witnesses. So Rav says, Ein Mukadeshes, she's not married. Why? Because she's only receiving which originally was hers. And why doesn't she say anything? Because there's no reason for her to say anything. But how do you know this? Maybe the reason why she remained silent, she was mochel. She waived the obligation to return it. Therefore, it became the one who's giving it to hers. So he's giving it to her in marriage. Let us say, shtika kodor, that silence is an indication of acceptance. So Rav brings the proof in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that a man who takes a basket of figs during Shemitah, during the sabbatical year, which is hefker, and he marries women, although the field initially is their field, she's mukadeshes. They're married. Why does the Mishnah have to say it was Shemitah? It would be any time. You give it to them, they remain silent, they're married. So evidently it's clear from the Mishnah, it's only because it was hefker, but if it would have been theirs, although there was silence, they're not married. So the Gemara goes now and asks a Rav from a Brisa. It says, Kitcha begezel b'chomus b'gneva. I just want to mention something which I mentioned in the past. We mentioned yesterday in the Sivis that normally, why is a thief, why does he have full liability? So we explained, because when you steal something, the Torah gives you a certain inherent monetary interest in the object, like an owner. And therefore, if something should happen to it, you have full liability. It's like your object was destroyed. And that's the concept of why Shinikona, why if it's altered, why once it's altered, the thief, he owns the altered item, because since there's no longer a chiyuv, an obligation to return it, therefore the item becomes the thief's. And that's what we discussed yesterday. So now, the Gemara in Bava Basra speaks about a case. You remember the case immediately once I mention it. There was a Sefer Torah that was owned by a community. And a thief comes in, and he steals the Sefer Torah out of the Aron Kodesh, presence of everybody in the community. So they witnessed it. And now you want to convict him, so you need evidence. You need witnesses. But every person in the community, because he has a financial interest in the Sefer Torah, he has a conflict of interest. He's called a Nogea. And a Nogea, a person is not qualified to testify. So how do you convict the thief, although they all witnessed the theft? That's what the Gemara discusses. So Gemara says that two of the people of the community, they should relinquish their rights to the Sefer Torah. And once they relinquish their rights, they're no longer Nogea, they no longer have a conflict, because they no longer have a financial interest, and they're qualified to testify. That's what the Gemara says. So Reb Kiva Eger asks a question on the Gemara. The Gemara says, we just said, it says, Ish ki yagdish beiso kodesh l'Hashem. A person consecrates his house kodesh l'Hashem. So it says, the way it said, the thief is not able to consecrate it because it's not his item. And the victim who was victimized is not able to consecrate it because it's b'shuso, because it's in a stolen state. So if that's the case, Rabbi Kiva Eger asks, how do the people relinquish their right, their ownership rights in the Sefer Torah, since the man, it's stolen, the thief still is in possession of the Sefer Torah, it's b'shuso. So it's b'shuso, you cannot transfer ownership rights if you're not, the way we explained, because it's not in your domain, or it's because the thief has intrinsic rights in it. So how do they relinquish their rights when they're not in control? That's Rabbi Kiva Eger's question. Does not answer it. No. It's a good question. So no, he personally doesn't have an answer. Okay? So the answer, which I once said many years ago, which many years ago there was an edition printed of Shas. This is many years before Art Scroll. It was called Ma'ora Shas, Ma'oros. It was put out by a Chabad family. They printed it. And in the Shas, they had certain glosses on the bottom of the page. And it cited Reb Kivega's question, which is on the side of the page, with an answer. And this was the answer. Now, we discussed yesterday, when a thief steals something, he has intrinsic ownership rights. When it's altered, the object becomes his. That's why if the vessel breaks, the shards belong to the thief. If the animal dies, when the carcass decays, who takes the loss? The thief takes the loss, because the carcass is the thief's. Now, how does the carcass become the thief's? So we explained, because since he has intrinsic ownership rights, therefore, now when it's altered, he no longer has an obligation to return it. Therefore, it's fully his. Right? That's how the Nesivis HaMishpat, the Nesivis explains it. So, now, what happens if somebody steals an object and the victim, so what prevents the thief from taking full possession of the object? The obligation to return the object. There's a mitzvah saseh, ve'eshav agzel shegozel. What would be a person steals something and the victim waives the obligation to return? He says, keep it. So he's not transferring the ownership rights to the thief. He's waiving the obligation to return. You only have obligation to return because Torah says, because the person, the victim, wants it back. But if the victim says, I'm not interested, you're welcome to keep it. It's like you have a debt. There's a mitzvah saseh to pay a debt. But let's say the creditor says, I'm willing to waive the debt. There's no longer an obligation to pay the debt, right? If the creditor is willing to waive the debt. So if the victim is willing to waive the obligation to return the stolen object, who does it become? It becomes the thief's. Because the only thing which is preventing him from taking ownership is his obligation to return it. So if there's no longer an obligation to return the object, it becomes the thief's. So here, if the two individuals, they're not transferring their share. They're not relinquishing their share. It's a consequence of what they're doing. When they say, you have an obligation to every one of the community to return the Sefer Torah. Because every person in the community has a financial interest in the Sefer Torah. So two people in the community says, in terms of ourselves, you have no obligation to return our share. So if you don't have no obligation to return our share, you become full owner in our share, whatever percentage that share is. Now, they know, so it's not they're transferring the money. They're not transferring ownership. They're waiving the obligation, and consequently, he takes over their share. It's like the object has been altered. No. What kind of obligation? What? No, it doesn't have to be altered. It's the same. It's the equivalent of that. It's the equivalent of that. When you alter it, why does the thief become? Because there's no longer an obligation to return the object. Right? Torah says, you must return the object. Once it's been... What? Doesn't make a difference, but the two who waive their obligation, he has an obligation, every person, to return. We're willing to waive. You have no obligation to return our share. So if we waive our... No, it's the same object. So he has to return it. But our percentage, you take possession of our percentage. Good. But again, we've already relinquished our share. It's not because we transferred the money to you. Once there's no obligation to return, then your intrinsic ownership becomes full ownership. So now let's say it's 2%, the two witnesses. Now you've taken full possession of that 2%. You have no obligation to return 2%. You're a partner together with the rest of them. So now we're no longer nogea. So if we no longer have a conflict, now we're qualified to testify. You're in anything. But the Gemara says that. The Gemara says the question was, but how did they? They don't. Well, they will get it back. You know,
when the Sefer comes back,
they relinquished it to the thief. To the thief. But if the thief has to return it now, I mean, afterwards the thief has a share in it. You understand?
Right.
No, but he's found out once he gets. Okay, it's not simple. No. It's no different than lightning striking the stolen item, and now you have shards of pottery. Right? He doesn't have to do. The original kinyonic, the original action of theft gives him that right. Gives him that intrinsic right in the object. The thief himself cannot, no, the thief himself cannot take possession of the object. Exactly.
But something
No.
happens.
So I'll tell you what happens. According to most Rishonim, what happens is a third party, now if he takes possession, he has a right to take possession.
What actually happened? What's the
No mechanism. No mechanism.
because it sounds like there was a change of ownership.
No change of ownership. No change of ownership. The original owner still has the same ownership, except the Torah says, because the person despairs, a third party, if he should take possession, he has a right to take possession. Because the person is in a despaired mindset. There's no new owner. No new owner. No, he doesn't have to buy it, he even takes physical possession.
Okay, it sounds like a change has occurred in that.
Change of the Torah. No. Changes. The Torah says if a man is still seeking out his object, still seeking it out, then no one has it right, meaning to the thief, he must return it because he stole it. To a third party, it must be returned because it's no worse than a lost object. If you find a lost object pre-despair, you have to return it. So pre-despair, the thief must return it because he stole it. If a third party comes upon it, he must return it because it's a lost object. It's lost from the owner, and the owner is still seeking it out. But once the owner stops seeking it out, to the third party, it's no longer a lost object, because Torah says a lost object post-despair, you have a right to take possession.
I understand the ruling.
No, but I'm just telling you, but again, I'm telling you.
What's happening with the ownership?
Same ownership. We discussed yesterday the halacha difference between Rashi and all the other Rishonim. Rashi says the moment you despair, it becomes ownerless. So there is a change in ownership. That's Rashi. The vast majority of the Rishonim say it's only a right for a third party to take possession. So what's the halachic difference? I said, let's say the original owner notices it, locates it after he despairs, and somebody preempts him and takes possession. Who owns the object? The original owner or the third party? According to Rashi, it's the third party. Because the moment you despaired, you have no rights anymore. It's ownerless. According to all the other Rishonim, despair only gives you a right to take possession. Once he's no longer in a state of despair, then you no longer have a right to take possession. So if the moment he notices it and he's no longer in a state of despair, you can't preempt him. Because the Torah now doesn't give you a right to take possession of that object any longer. It's only it's a state of mind.
You go from having despair
To non-despair. If you,
that changes.
the right for the third party to take possession.
So what,
Gives him
even
something to
though,
change it.
so a man loses an object, he despairs, and somebody comes and says to him, you know something?
I saw it.
Okay, and the man changes.
Wait, and he believes the man.
And he believes the man.
Right?
And
So he's no longer in a state of despair. He's no longer in a state of despair.
But how does he effectuate? How does that change take? I understand that.
Because the Torah says only if a person has given up on his item, then the third party can take possession of his item. But he has,
The man gave.
but he changed it. Now he's not. He's back where he started.
We said that when that Sefer Torah was stolen from the shul, after it's stolen.
No, there's no
God
despair.
changed.
No, there's no despair there. There's no despair.
I know that.
That's something else. There, you're relinquishing an obligation. You're waiving an obligation. Once the obligation is waived, it's waived.
You made the point that if you don't change the ownership right, you have to make another point.
Wait.
You have to change the
No, that's for a different reason. No. That's
that was the distinction that you made.
no. That wasn't the distinction I made. No. Okay. We need group participation, Andrew. The difference was this. We quoted Rabbi Yochanan. The Torah says, "Ish ki yagdish beis Hashem." A person steals an object. The only way you could consecrate something, it has to be similar to the consecration of one's house. Beiso. What does that mean? When a person has a home, has a residence. Firstly, the residence is his. It's his, and also it's in his possession. It's in both. It's in his domain. Then you could consecrate it. But if any one of the two characteristics is lacking, you cannot consecrate it. So the thief who doesn't own it, although physically he's in possession of it, cannot consecrate it. And the one who is the victim, although he owns it, He's not able to consecrate because it's not in his possession. That's what's derived from that pasuk. That means you cannot transfer ownership unless it's in your possession, although you own it. So that was difficult with the Gemara in Bava Basra. The Sefer Torah, although they own it, every member owns it, but how does he transfer that ownership? It's not under his control. That was the question. So we said, you're not transferring ownership. You're waiving the obligation to return the object. Has nothing with despair. There you consciously say you no longer have an obligation to return the stolen object to me. If Reuven steals from Shimon, and Shimon calls him up and says, I want to return the object, he says, forget it, you could keep it. Does the person still have an obligation to return the stolen object to the victim? No. The victim waived the obligation to return it. So what difference does it make if the person who owned it fully waives the obligation to return it, or the one who owns 2% says, your obligation to me, as a partial owner, I waive that obligation to return it. Same thing. On the person. The person has the obligation to return it. I'll give you a case. No, because he's only waiving 2%. You can only waive the obligation of your ownership. You have a whole community that owns the Sefer Torah. You have 2%. What about the other 98%? Then you have no obligation to return it. It becomes fully yours. Although you didn't do a new act of acquisition. It's lying in public domain. The thief has it in public domain, and now the victim waives the obligation to the thief. It's a mitzvah saseh, positive commandment. I waived it. The obligation's only because the owner wants it back. Once the owner doesn't want it back any longer, you have no obligation to return it. You waive it. You have an obligation to pay a debt. The creditor says, you know something, I'm willing to waive it. There was a mitzvah till that moment. Once he waives it, you're giving back your object. It's not his object. Right? You're not fulfilling the mitzvah. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah. The mitzvah's gone because he waived it.
So a person loses an object and he despairs. I despair that I will ever find it again. But at the same time, in my head, I say, I'm not relinquishing my
It's irrelevant, which doesn't make a difference. Being in a state of despair automatically allows another person to take possession. It doesn't go one way. It's a fact. That state of mind, that emotional feeling of despair, allows a third party to take possession.
I don't understand how that can be reversed by the presence of new information.
I'm not in the state of despair any longer. In your case, I am despairing, but I don't want to let go. It's irrelevant whether you. No, Rashi's gone. I'm not going to go to Rashi. Once it's hefker, it's hefker. It's gone.
The case that David is presenting, that no one picked up the object, right? If someone
No one picked up the object.
My question is, you've gone out of our way with this story of the people with the Sefer Torah and the 2% and so forth, to make the point that if the object is not in your presence, you cannot affect ownership of it.
You cannot transfer ownership.
You cannot transfer ownership. You cannot affect the ownership.
No. But here you are affecting the ownership, the way we explained it.
You're not. You're dealing with a technical issue about
No, but that's...
the right.
No, but that's how it affects it. That's how it affects the ownership. Because the thief has an interest, a financial interest, but the only reason why he can't take full possession is because he has an obligation to return it, which doesn't allow that interest to take over totally. That's what we explained. Why, when you alter something, how does he become the owner? Even if the object is not reacquired by the thief. The object is struck by lightning in public domain. Not in his own courtyard. How does it become his?
So here's my question. So I'm drawing a fine line. The man despairs, and now something changed after he despairs in that object. He no longer has an ownership interest.
Who's this? This stolen object or a lost object? No, makes no. A lost object makes no difference.
Doesn't make a difference. He has despaired. Once he goes from the state of non-despair into despair,
Nothing.
change takes place.
No, not a change in the object. A change regarding if somebody comes upon it, does he have an obligation to return it or doesn't have the obligation? The thief has an obligation to return it because his obligation preceded the despair. Now let's say a third party comes upon it, post-despair. Post-despair, Torah says he has a right to take it.
But there's a change in
Not in the object. No, in the relationship to the world.
the relationship of the original owner to that object. Something changed. When he goes from
He fully owns it.
despair to
No.
despair,
No. Presently, he fully owns the object. He fully owns the object monetarily.
he does.
Yes.
He fully owns it.
I'll give you an example. According to the other Rishonim, let's say a person would pick up the object. He has in mind not to acquire it, and he takes the obligation. The object says, Harei mukadeshesli. Marries a woman with it. But when he picked it up, he did not have in mind to acquire it. Is she married? She's not married. Why? Because you're marrying her with the original owner's object. It's fully his. You definitely gave her something of value. No, she could acquire it. She could acquire it. If she has in mind to acquire, she could acquire it. But what did you never acquired it. If you say the man who marries, it must be his object, according to that discussion. You did not give her something of yours, although she acquired it. So she will not be married. But let's say he had in mind when he picked it up, he had in mind to acquire it. When he gave it to her, she is married.
So I just want to say, so what we've said now, this object that went from a state of non-despair to despair, something changed. We're saying nothing changed in the ownership. The man still owns that.
Oh, until
100%.
somebody takes possession, he owns it 100%. Correct. Correct. It's not yours any longer.
It changed it for us.
Yeah, there somebody acquired it.
So now, so we're saying the difference if he goes from non-despair to despair, back to non-despair.
Correct.
All the time he's had a full ownership of that.
Correct. 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 Correct.
It just so happened that nobody in the meantime picked it up.
Exactly. Exactly.
So nothing changed.
Nothing changed. Right. But according to Rashi, he says the moment you despair, it becomes ownerless. He says it's hefker. Those are Rashi's words.
Okay, so according to Rashi,
No question.
there is a change that took place.
Serious change.
Okay, now what happens? So would Rashi agree that if he goes from
No.
non-despair,
It's irrelevant. You're like a stranger regarding that object.
he has no rights.
No rights. No rights. It's gone. It's gone.
Okay, so
He has to
this is
reacquire it. He has to reacquire. Exactly. Exactly. And that's the point we made.
So if somebody, I just want to finish this so just so I understand it. So if somebody steals an object, and now he wants to return it, but he doesn't want people to know that he was the thief. So he sends it to the post office, and he sends a note saying, the object I stole, an anonymous note, is at the post office, go claim it. So while it's sitting at the office, at the post office, who owns that object? The thief has relinquished his right of ownership.
But no, thief has no relevance to relinquish. We're talking about the victim, the one who was victimized. Did he despair?
Let's suppose he didn't despair.
Didn't despair. It's the thief's object. It's the victim's object.
But
And
ownership did acquire some ownership.
no. Now there's a question. The Gemara, we rule a halacha that unless the owner agreed that it should be in the post office, the thief has full liability until it enters into the domain of the victim. Until it's fully returned to the...
But he doesn't own it.
Let's say he sends it to the post office box of the victim with a note. The moment it arrives there,
No, he just sent it to the post office.
no. He still has full liability until the owner...
But the owner still has full rights in that object.
Correct?
Now, let's suppose it was if the man despaired. The original owner despaired, and the thief sent it to the post office.
And what happened?
It's waiting.
It's still his. According to Rashi, it's not his any longer.
It's not his anymore.
Not his any longer.
So he doesn't have, he has to reacquire it.
If somebody else preempts him and takes that object, it's the third parties.
But if nobody preempted,
According to Rashi, he's reacquiring it.
and according to the other Rishonim,
No, he's not reacquiring. He's taking what's right, what was always his.
Someone finds a lost object, and at the time he found the lost object, the owner hadn't displayed it. But in between, before he got a chance to give it back to the owner displayed it.
So that's the Gemara above Mitzvah. Elu Mitzias. That's 6th grade Torah Vadas, no? That's when you learned it. Okay, so the Gemara says that it's because since the obligation came upon you,
Right, it's the same as
It's the same as the thief, so you must return it.
Getting back to the basket of fruit.
Yeah.
So if he takes this basket of fruit and then basket of apples and then makes applesauce out of it, so now the apples are gone. Now it's apple.
It's Shvius
No, not
during the year.
he owns. The woman owns the basket. He takes the basket of apples, changes it, makes applesauce, and gives it to her as a way of possession.
No, it's his object because he altered 100%, 100%.
That woman, if he just alters the object.
Right.
So really, when you alter a stolen object, that's like you're taking total ownership. You have complete ownership.
Correct, correct, correct.
It seems like
But you still, full restitution.
the object itself is totally yours, and you can do whatever you want.
Correct, 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 correct. There's a whole discussion whether you could use it as a korban. After you alter something, because the source, the origin, comes from something stolen. Right? We ruled. The Gemara Bava Kama. No, with marriage. You know, you remind me, the photographer says, the chuppah is sacred. You can't take pictures under the chuppah. That's what the Reform and Conservative rabbi says. What is he marrying the woman? Has nothing to do with hegdish. Nothing with the woman. It's a kinyan. That's all it is. Consecration, something else. The Gemara says if you steal wheat and you thresh it and then you mill it and you bake it into bread. If you take the challah, it's called Einim Vorech. One doesn't on Afrosha. One doesn't say a bracha because that's Mikeitz. Meaning that it's actually it's like you're almost blaspheming God. You mean you're saying a bracha on something that's stolen? What do you mean? It's been altered. That's fine. It's fine. It's only if the object itself, initially, the origin was stolen. Although you altered it monetarily, it's yours, doesn't make a difference. Okay. So now the Gemara asks the question. We're holding the Gemara on Nun Bezim and Aleph. Meisvei. Kitcha bechomos begneva of chotav sela biyodo. He marries her with a stolen object, something where he forcefully took it and paid for it, or geneva. Or he grabbed the coin out of her hand, the kitcha. Bukudeshes, she's married. So we're speaking about he took something that's hers. He took her coin, and then he gave it back to her. She remained silent. Said, "Rei Bukudeshes, Bukudeshes." Somewhere says, "Hosam Migesel Lido." It's not difficult, because there it was her coin initially. We're talking about two different cases. Meaning, if it's somebody else's coin, and you give it to her, then she's Ein Bukudeshes. But when you give it to herself, since she remained silent, that's mechila. She's waiving the obligation to return it, so it becomes the man's. So when he's giving her the coin, he's marrying with his coin. So Mar says, but how could you say that? Hamiktani Sefer. We have a number of cases. As person marries a woman, Gezel Chomis Geneva, or the last case, he grabbed the coin out of her hand. So it says, Hamiktani Sefer, Oshechotav Selim Mishalo. He grabbed, he seized her coin, Mechlal de Reisha, Begezel Dalmo. So the inference is the opening case is speaking if someone else has stolen an object. And yet it says she's married. On that, the Gemara answers, Farushe Komefarish. The conclusion is elucidating the first case. What does that mean? Kitcha Begezel B'chomsub Gneva Ketzad. And who is the owner of those stolen items? Kigon Shechotav Selim Yoda V'Kitchabo. Where he actually seized the coin from her, and he married her with the coin that he seized. They gave it to her, and she remained silent. And what does it say in the Brisa? It says Mukudeshes. She's married. So the Gemara is going to ask the question. But this is contrary to what Rav said. Rav deduced from our Mishnah that the only reason why she's married when you took the basket of fruit, of figs, is because it's Shvius. But if it wouldn't be Shvius, since the basket of fruit is hers, or these women, then not Mukudeshes. So that's the Gemara's question. Our Mishnah is speaking where the item was stolen from them. Ukama Rav, Ein Mukudeshes. Rav says, if it would not be the Shvius, if the fruit would not be Hefker, she Ein Mukudeshes. And here we have a Bryce says, it's her coin, it says Mukudeshes. He stole the coin from her and gave it back to her as kiddushin, and she remained silent. The Bryce says Mukudeshes. No, we said the Sefer is elucidating the Reisha. It's speaking, it's her coin, it's not somebody else's coin. Therefore, her silence is waiving the obligation. Therefore, she's mukadeshes. Okay? But we still have to reconcile with Rav's inference of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is the only reason why she's mukadeshes is because the produce was produce of shvius, because it was hefker. But if it wasn't a hefker, she ain't a mukadeshes. So how do we reconcile the Bryce with the Mishnah? That's the first question. Kommer Rav, ain't mukadeshes, lo kasha. Hod shodich, hod lo shodich. Was there a shidduch, was there not a shidduch? What does it mean? If it was prearranged, they're already engaged to be married, and he didn't have any money, he grabs the coin from her and says, Harebu Kadeshesli, with this coin. There we could say, because they have a previous relationship and they want to get married, so what's the silence? The silence is an indication she's waiving the obligation. It's okay. What about he grabs a coin from a woman, he doesn't know the woman from Adam, and he says, Harebu Kadeshesli, and she remains silent. There the silence is not an indication of agreement. Why? She's remaining silent. She's getting her coin back. She doesn't know the man from Adam. They weren't prearranged. It wasn't prearranged, the marriage. There's no relationship from before that they intend to get married. So because I remain silent, that means I'm agreeable to marry you? Definitely not. If he would take his own coin and give it to her, say, Mikdeshesli, even if it's not Mishudeches, there's no Mishudeches, she's married. Because why did you remain silent? A person doesn't remain silent. You have to have a basis for the silence. That she's agreeable to what he said. But over here, since we could attribute it... Wait a second. She doesn't have to protest. If he takes a coin, she doesn't know the man from Adam, and he forcibly takes the coin away from her, gives it to her, the silence is not an indication of anything. Of course, it could have been attributed, she's getting her item back. Right? But let's say he would take his own coin and say, Haremu Gudeshesli, gives her the coin. She remained silent. They never saw one another. Now, how do you remain silent? He gave you something which is his. How do you remain silent? That means, from the way it's understood, you're married to the man. And it can't be attributed to anything but that. So there we say the silence is acceptance to what he wanted to do. Because you accepted the coin and remained silent. But over here, where it could be attributed the silence because I'm getting back which is rightfully mine, therefore, we could attribute silence to that. Therefore, the silence has no relevance to what he wanted to bring about. It's his, because it's hefker. So it's like taking his coin and giving it to her. He's giving to her his coin. But why did she remain silent? She should have protested immediately. Why didn't she say something? But when you steal his coin, her coin, she should have said something.
Rabbi, if it was a shidduch and he gives her the coin, she made silent. When they know each other, we assume that she has the mechanics.
It's more than knowing one another. They want to get married. Right. They're planning to get married.
She has to know she has to relinquish, like those people in school, they have to have some kind of...
Look, when somebody steals something for you, do you know that what you had is no longer yours? Right. And now he's giving it back to me, and every woman knows that to get married, the man has to give you something which is not yours. That's basic knowledge of marriage. Everybody knows that. So therefore she says, I agree that it should be yours, and I'm taking what's yours.
Without actually verbalizing it, it's understood.
Right, that's understood. No. It's not because of embarrassment. No. That was Barba Eliyoshev. It was a very wealthy family. They would not marry less than a bucket of gold coins. No. There it's something else. You're giving me something which it's insulting. If you're of a certain status, unless it could be said definitely with certainty, that is, by Barba Eliyoshev, that this certain family, anything less than a certain amount of money, even though she accepts it, there's no way she's accepting it in marriage. We could say it with definiteness. It's like she said before he gives her, I will not take less than $1,000. And he gives her a penny. Right? And she remains silent. She just said it a moment before. Okay, so it's clear. Because of the women, their status in society, There's no way this woman's agreeable to be married. I mean, it's a question. Tosfos has a question on this, to be continued.